Hi, it's Crystal Weiss with Spring Branch ISD's Educational Technology Department, and I am with Carla Pace today. So Carla, introduce yourself and tell us what you teach and where you are and what you've been doing.
Sure. So my name's Carla Pace. I am a science teacher at Spring Branch Middle School. I am also one of the teachers in our Endeavor program. So for the past 3 years, I have been teaching science to a diverse group of students in classes as part of our micro school concept, where we are focused on giving students more control over the pace of their learning, making sure we were providing differentiated lessons that followed our proficiency scales, so developing proficient and advanced, and fostering a strong sense of community for our students.
And just because I'm not sure of the history, was It's Learning already in place when y'all developed this? Or did you kind of know that you were going to need an LMS to make this happen?
Okay, so It's Learning was already in place. Part of our research and design process to get to the micro school was we piloted several different things. And so this is now year 3, so about three and a half years ago, It's Learning was already around, and one of our pilot programs was we sort of started using It's Learning to try to do some differentiated lessons with students, and it just became a natural fit in order to really leverage ourselves as teachers so that we can have multiple activities and lessons happening in one classroom at the same time.
Awesome. So you said you've been doing this for 3 years.
Yep.
So why don't you just kind of walk us through where you started and kind of where you are now?
Great. So I started in teaching 6th graders. We started with a 6th grade group, and I was new to the curriculum. I'd never taught 6th grade science before. And we were new to this whole program and idea of what we wanted to do. So I started with developing pre-tests for students, really looking at the TEKS and the proficiency scales that the district provided us to try to offer different levels for students. 3 levels at first was super intimidating, especially for someone new to curriculum. So I really just honed in on 2 levels at the beginning. Especially first semester, and then as I became more comfortable, it was easier to branch up to 3 levels later on. So this is an example of what I did in 6th grade. So this is one of our units, Unit 3. Actually, I can show you Unit 1 where I began. It's like a little bit more bare, but these are our big concepts that we were covering: gravity, the solar system, and space exploration. And you can see that I started off really just utilizing resources and putting stuff in It's Learning that the students could access. So you see I have 2 different builds. We called builds like their note-taking part, or their like where the students are taking in their learning. So this would be an example of a proficient activity that the students did. So they have some videos that they needed to watch. Like you see, there's just very little here. Resources to help them. I provided them a note sheet so that they could go through and fill some things in. The advanced is, I used like different resources. They had a different note sheet that they filled in too, just to try to stretch them a little bit further. And then we use the vocabulary of launch, which is where students are explaining their learning and thinking. And so again, this is just basic directions for them. If I show the assignment to you, so there it shows what it is, so that it gives them a question that they need to ponder and just answer it and reply back to me. So really simple. This land was just a real check for understanding to see where they are, just a mini quiz that has 8 questions in it, just so I could see where they were to do next steps. And so really the goal in 6th grade was more to get them used to managing their own learning at their own pace. It was more of we're going to start this on Monday. You need to complete these 3 different steps by like Thursday or something along those lines, just to get them used to being able to be more self-sufficient, because in order to really, I think, meet with different groups and small groups and things like that, they have to be able to do some stuff on their own. And then when you get up to Unit 3, you see some different things that take place. I'll share density. Again, I just have 2 different levels here because that's about where I was at that point. But when you look in here, you'll see that these pages have changed and become a little bit more robust. I'm giving them notes, telling them how to do it. There's embedded videos. There are questions that they're answering as they go. As we scroll down, they are practicing problems. There's links for them to check their work. So my knowledge expanded quite significantly, so that they could be able to do more things on their own. And then it does look different for the different levels. So if I switch to the more advanced version, you can see that although the overall structure looks the same, they have different videos that they're watching. They're looking at a different substance. They're still meeting the same teak, but they're actually able to go a little bit further quicker. And so then they take that learning and apply it to a fluid, and then think about how density impacts other things in our world, such as water and air masses and different things like that.
So I think that it's really interesting that you kind of have this gradual release or this zone of proximal development, but it actually really met what the kids needed. Mm-hmm. They needed a simple page at the beginning.
Yes, they did.
So really and truly, that was a great learning experience. And I think as we get too deep into it, then we want to make things really fancy. But if our kids are new at using it, then keeping it really simple for them is a good idea.
Yes.
So don't beat yourself up if you're new and you're like, this is really simplistic, because the kids are new in a lot of cases also. Mm-hmm. And if we're looking at younger grades, then really keeping it simple is the best way of going about it. So I'm glad that you showed us that, because it really made me think of that we always kind of want to do bigger and better and make it look like it's beautiful, but for our kids, that's maybe not where they are.
Yeah, and I always have to remind myself they're more resilient than I am, and they can adjust to change a lot faster than I can. And if it's not perfect, it's okay. And I think what's been interesting is, because I think as they've seen my failures and attempts, in some ways I think it's helped them have more power to fail and attempt, and try it out like, it's going to be all right. We're going to figure this out. So I see their problem solving has almost improved in some ways, because they've seen me have to problem solve before. Yeah.
That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really great for the kids.
Yeah. So that was 6th grade. So that was 2 years ago. As we get into 7th grade, so 7th grade is when I started really utilizing plans and pathways. I really enjoyed doing plans because of the date feature. It was nice for students because when you add in these dates, when they would go to look at it, it would just pop up the current plan that we were working on. So I felt like it helped focus their attention, especially for some of them that you constantly have to remind, this is the unit we're on, this is the page we're working on. It helped them kind of hone in and see what we're doing and where we're going. And I also like the way it kind of organized the information too, within smaller chunks for them. And I didn't have to go in and create as many folders as I was doing the year before, just going through resources. So that was a benefit for me. Some things you'll see here is a lot of stuff still looks similar to 6th grade. So I still give them some opportunities for notes. We're still doing some practice problems and different things. But when I started using pathways, so I'll give an example. This was a pathway that we did related to Punnett squares. So in this situation here, the land was it's like a short quiz or check for understanding, again, a mini quiz through its learning, where it gives you several different questions. This one happens to have 10. I like that you can do a blend of multiple choice, short answer, matching, all those different things on its learning. So I feel like it's not just a standard multiple choice test. But then it grades it for me, so I don't have to spend as much time grading myself, and the kids can get feedback really quickly. And then there's an assignment, this one's a page, that gave them some notes that they were taking as a stretch for them, so that they can go through and study this. So this was more for the advanced students to work on, learning about blood types that they can go through to extend their thinking further. The ones that didn't necessarily do as well, then I would pull them in and we would do a different lesson. But what I like about pathways is, as a student gets into a pathway, is it chunks the material for them automatically. Some feedback I got from students when I started using pathways, some of them did not like it because they wanted to see everything all at once. Mm-hmm. They wanted to see where they were going. Others of them said they really liked it because it limited what they could see and they didn't feel as overwhelmed when there were multiple steps and things they needed to do. And then the other ones that at first said, no, I like to see everything at once. But then they were like, actually, you're kind of right. It helps me do one thing at a time and do it well, and then I can go to the next step. So that was kind of my first foray into pathways. And then as I got further along, I started actually doing multiple different pathways. I have a developing, I have a proficient, and I have an advanced, all with different steps and things that the students can do. So it gives them some notes, it gives them a task to complete, and then a practice as well. And so these were not necessarily graded items on its learning, but it helped the students know exactly what they needed to do in their process to learn about dichotomous keys.
And I think that's important to note is even if you're not grading it in its learning, putting it in as a task so the kids have that step of coming back and checking off that they're done does help, I think, keep the kids in line. That helps me in life when I can check it off and say, okay, now I'm done with this piece, I can move on to the next piece. So just even if it's totally done outside, and you'll see that this is a task, so this is something that the kids were doing outside of its learning, but they still have a record of it here so that they know, here I am, here's where I go next. And then there's also that pathway that you've created so that you can go back and say, here's what we covered. So that's a great idea.
That's where we are. And then even later in the year, I liked starting to use pathways because then I can actually use it to push students in different directions. So this is an example of we gave students a project, and I'll just click on the proficient. And so in this situation, because sometimes students, as they're learning material, they might improve their level of understanding. So they're not developing forever. They're not proficient forever. As they've gained some understanding, they might be like, oh, I am ready to go to the next level. Oh, I do really get this. I can show you more. So we set up this pathway as a land. So there's like a mini quiz to start off. And then based on the grade, it pushes them to a different project. So on this first one, you'll see if they score at least an 80, that was our threshold that we used for line between advanced and proficient. If they scored at least an 80, it skipped them up ahead to the advanced level project. So they were still able to get what they needed. It was funny with students because a few of them would be like, okay, great, I'm going. Some of them, they would be so proud that they got bumped up a level. They're like, yes, I made it up. That's great. A few of them were slightly frustrated. They're like, what do you mean? I was on proficient. Why do I have to do the advanced one? And I'd be like, because you've arrived, you've made it. Like, this is where you say thank you for challenging you. And then they'd sometimes mumble, thank you for challenging me. But they would, I think, secretly appreciate it, and they would do well. And it was interesting to see, like, that they were capable and that they could challenge themselves further.
Did you find the students ever trying to kind of game the system a little bit?
Oh, yes. There are a few. There are a few that, you have some students that will try to do the least amount of effort possible. They are your 5%. It's not the majority of the population. But some of those, they'd try to game the system and I wouldn't let them. And they would be frustrated. I'd be like, look, that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is for you to challenge yourself at the level you're supposed to be. But I would say the majority of them would try to do more rigorous work. I would always kind of leave open all 3 levels the past few years for students because I would tell them you are always welcome to go up a level. You're not welcome to go down. So if they wanted to take on that initiative and challenge themselves, and I would have at least 50% that just would. On their own.
That's awesome.
Which is awesome. Like they had some drive, And then there were a few that they would recognize on their pretest score. They'd say, oh, I don't know why I answered that wrong. My level really should be here, so I'm going to push myself. And then there would be a few that say, I really guessed on every single one of those questions. Can I please do this level instead? So as we'd have our conversations, and it was really nice to hear them say that. Like they're really understanding what they do and don't know like early on, and they're able to articulate that, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so what's going on this year?
So this year I am teaching 8th grade, so I have another level of curriculum. So where I have started this year, we'll just take a quick overview. Right now we're working on Unit 2. So we have a pre-test, they have their data tracker, some vocabulary, and this year, as I'm learning new curriculum, I feel like I'm somewhat taking a step back on its learning because developing again. But I've done some pathways, but I've played around with permissions this year. So on giving only access to certain things. So for example, on this particular activity, there was a notes thing that they did, followed by an actual assignment that they would turn in through It's Learning. And I know it sounds like I'm saying notes a lot, but we're still doing lab activities. We're still doing hands-on stuff. Like this is just the stuff where I can now have 4 different lessons or activities happening in the room at the same time. So I can actually offer 3 different reading levels for notes without necessarily everybody knowing who's reading what.
Right.
You know, and without me having to pass out 3 different colored sheets of paper or different things like that. So that's really why you see notes a lot on here, because that's more independent and student-led,
Right.
As opposed to fully being teacher-led. So in this case, the assignment that they did, they had, I utilized the Google integration, where they had to go through actually, no, this was just they had a separate sheet of paper, and then they had to complete it, and then there was a question that they needed to answer as well. But I used a pathway here, again, to help chunk it for students to know what was coming next. And then when you look at the actual pathway, I started playing around with permissions. And permissions just controls who has access to the different resources. Because I was finding, while some students appreciated the multiple levels and being able to go where they wanted, for some students it was overwhelming to see 3 different things all the time. So when you click on it, I can actually decide what students have access to this. And so I kind of reduced it to where they'd only see 1 or 2 things. And when I showed this to them, they were like, that's really cool. Like, I think even for typically some of your more struggling students at like organization and finding things, this was really helpful to them because it was less fluff and stuff to get through.
Right.
So it was nice to be able to control it.
With them, then, and they needed another level, you could add them.
I can easily go in and add them. And there were a few that were like, I'm not really sure yet, so I gave them access to both. And then they could just pick which one they wanted.
That's
so
awesome.
that kind of narrowed the choices. So that's, this year I'm just kind of adding in that layer, and I think it's nice for students.
And I think that's a great layer to add in. You were mentioning, having a new curriculum.
Yeah.
So spending time like making things fancier, doing deeper or more is not the best use of time this year.
Right.
But doing what you know works for kids and then adding a smaller layer that is
Right.
It's smaller, but it's big also.
Right.
Is really meaningful for the kids.
Yeah.
So as you've worked with the same kids kind of through the years, how have you noticed kind of their attitudes change or their abilities change?
It's pretty remarkable how quickly they adjust and adapt. And it's interesting because we've had some additional students come into our program. We've had some students kind of exit throughout the year. And it's interesting feedback I hear from other teachers about those students and what I see in students. So this year our program's reduced a little bit. So I have 4 classes this year as opposed to 6 last year. And what I have noticed, like those 4 classes, because they have been exposed to this, like doing things on their own before and have utilized It's Learning quite a bit before, we started the year and they'd just be like, okay, great. And they just go and they know what to do. I'm not constantly saying, what do the directions say? What is it? What's your next step? They just go and they can do that on their own. My 2 classes where those are not the same students, it's been a bigger learning curve for them. They've had exposure to It's Learning, so they know where to click and kind of know what to do, but they're struggling a little bit more with the independent process. And I'm having to remind myself, like, okay, that's right, they're not quite there yet. This group did not all have Chromebooks last year. It was our 6th grade class that did, but not our 7th grade class. So it's reminding me to step back and think about what is that first year like again for them and how to scale it back and being more patient and giving them more time to adjust and knowing that while that seems frustrating now, you'll gain that time back like so much later on in the year. So right now I'm just having to slow down with them a little bit, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's, I think that it's good to note that you can see that other people can see the difference, that it is a skill that the kids can learn and will help them. I mean, not It's Learning probably, but there's going to be an
Yeah.
LMS somewhere in their
Yes.
life for the rest of forever, it seems like. I mean,
Yeah.
even work has some
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of LMS component to it these days.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm really excited that you joined us.
Thanks.
Anything else that you'd like to share before we sign off?
No, just yeah, it takes practice, but it's great. It's worthwhile. Utilize your team if you can. Like, learn together, grow together. Sandbox courses are awesome for that. So you can kind of share the load and help one another.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Crystal.